Well, it's that time of the week which I sort of tremble in my shoes just a little bit. Kirk Clyatt is no longer in Vegas, well, just for this week. He's walking the
That's right.
streets of where, Kirk?
I'm walking the streets of Philadelphia, actually West Philadelphia, just a little bit west of the University City area. And if I knew how to, off the top of my head, switch the camera, we could show you some more. But you kind of can still get the general idea. These are some houses that are probably a little more than 100 years old, and they're huge back when people had 6-bedroom houses. So it is a gentrifying area. It was kind of a working class area of Philadelphia for a long time, but now we're seeing some very interesting juxtapositions of housing where you'll have a very old house next to one that's modern right next to it. It's like, whoa, how does these two things go together? But it's a very interesting, fascinating, dynamic city. And yes, very, very democratic, that's for sure.
Because you were once a sort of a almost a minor celeb there. You were the weatherman of
Yeah,
Philly.
yeah. For 3 years, I was on TV here. I was one of the B-list celebrities, maybe C-list. Well, they couldn't get somebody from the A-list or the B-list here in Philadelphia. They'd call me. Let me see if I can just flip the camera here for you. If I can figure this out here to do this. Where's that? Where's the camera flip?
This is just this is the on the fly. Now tell me about the flight. Speaking on the fly, how was the flight?
It was pretty interesting. Here, I just want to show you something here in town. There are these signs, thousands of them, thousands that say, vote, make a plan, vote, make a plan. And in the city, all there are Biden-Harris signs everywhere. There are thousands of them up. But it's interesting because when you go into the suburbs, there you start to see the Trump signs. Here it's a little bent right there, but you see another one there, and then another one across the street. There are these, I cannot even imagine how many of these vote, make a plan signs that the city has put up. I think it's the city that's put up. And on every other phone pole is a Biden-Harris sign. And here comes a Philadelphia trash truck. And they do something very interesting here in Philadelphia. They certainly don't have to worry about that where you are in Brisbane. But in the winter, when it snows, to supplement the snowplows, they actually put a snowplow blade on the front of the trash trucks, and they go down the streets here in Philadelphia. Actually, just a beautiful day-to-day temperature in the low 20s. Leaves ought to be starting to change. And you were asking a little bit about the flight. Actually, if you could just imagine there wasn't a pandemic, it was actually much more pleasant to fly. And the reason for that is there just weren't the crowds. The plane about half full. I had a connection in Dallas. So I had no one in my row from Las Vegas to Dallas, and then no one in my row again from Dallas here to Philadelphia. So it's kind of, you almost feel like you're giving the steerage provisions from the third class cabin. There you are. Here's another phone pole. Same thing from across the street. There are more of them. The steerage cabins, because you come on the plane, they give you a baggie. And in that baggie, you've got a handy wipe. And they still have trolleys there. You may be able to see it in the distance here, which is kind of cool here in West Philly, where it's a trolley. It's not a bus. So that's kind of neat. But they give you a baggie. And in the baggie, as I mentioned, the wipe, a bottle of water, and a cracker. So that is what you get. But all in all, it was actually a very pleasant experience. So the plane was early. So we'll see how it is going back. But I tell you, it is much, much tougher to, get flights than it was because there's simply not as many of them. There used to be American Airlines, which has their hub here in Philadelphia, one of their hubs. They used to have, 3 or 4 nonstops a day to Vegas. Now they have one.
Wow.
So coming up here on Baltimore Avenue, which is one of the main drags here. And look at this. They're everywhere. Everywhere. It's kind of remarkable. And here you get an idea of what we've got going on. You got the Philadelphia paramedics out here. So
Well,
really interesting.
But they're there for you because they know that you're talking about the elections, and they saw last week's episode and they thought, oh my God, he needs paramedics.
Well, I might after the vice presidential debate, which by the time you watch this, The vice presidential debate will be over, but it's going to be getting started here in a couple of hours. So if you can't hear me, it's obviously because of some street musicians here. And most people, right now I'm not because I'm talking to you, but most people, even on the streets, they wear masks, which is pretty interesting. Tell you what, I'll run across the street here on Baltimore Avenue and notice on the road trolley tracks. There are not that many cities. Well, now they're starting to be more and more. But Philadelphia is one of the few cities that never gave up their trolleys. So there you go, Philadelphia Fire Department in action there for you. And this is Baltimore Avenue, but it was very pleasant to get here. Philadelphia is a great city with the exception of maybe December, January, February, March. So 8 months of the year, it's a pretty nice place to go. And I have no idea what's going on with the extremely loud local entertainment across the street.
No, we organised that for you, you see.
Oh, did you?
We have our reach is great. We can go to all parts of the studio. Hey, tell me after we spoke last week, we know what happened with Donald.
Amazing.
Now he's out again. Who do you think is the more stronger at the moment, and who is the weaker? I mean, is it Trump or Biden?
You know what's fascinating that we've got going on here is we've got, there you are, another one of those signs, is interesting, just a little sidebar going by here. Pennsylvania is one of only 2 states in the country where the state controls the alcohol sales. So the state, that's a state liquor store there.
Wow.
So they get all the money from the booze here in this state. But what's fascinating is today a Rasmussen poll came out, and Rasmussen is usually very conservative. It's the one that Trump often tweets about, saying, 50% approval rating from Rasmussen. It's so good. It's so wonderful. Today, it showed him 12 points behind Joe Biden. So clearly the debate performance and the hospitalization and some of his just crazy actions where he's saying, he's breaking off discussions with the Democrats on the stimulus, and then he's starting it back, and then he's got it for the airlines, and then he wants one stimulus check. He's just all over the place. And multiple reports today here that he's, one day back in the White House and is actually in the Oval Office. I mean, my gosh, they have basically carved that place out because so many people in the White House have gotten COVID. And you have the situation with the justice, the judge that has been appointed a justice. This is interesting. Used to be a bank, and now it's a food co-op. So that's an interesting place. But you've got a situation there where, I mean, how does she feel? I guess the desire and the power of wanting to be on the Supreme Court overrules the fact that during the time that she was appointed, that has become a super spreader event. And just what's so bizarre that we've got going on here is that the White House is not doing much to cooperate with D.C. to trace all these cases down. Here's kind of cool. This is a look at one of the SEPTA streetcars that we got going on.
Yeah, that's a tram. That's a tram.
It's a streetcar. You better know how to parallel park. That's all I can say. But
you do. That's also someone from our camp. They've heard you talk about Donald in such a bad way.
But it's amazing. And it's interesting because you look at voting. Voting here in Pennsylvania is actually much more difficult than it is in Nevada. Nevada makes it considerably easier to vote. For instance, Nevada sends a ballot to every registered voter in the state. Here you have to request one. They don't have as many early voting sites and locations. In fact, when I lived here, you could only actually vote on election day. So it's just fascinating to see the contrast and the difference in states as far as their election laws go.
What about the movements of both candidates? We saw what happened to Trump. And I mean, Joe's movements, well, he's sort of retarded in his movements anyway because of his age and other ailments. But for a 95-year-old, he certainly moves around. But do you think they should be? You think both Trump and Joe Biden should be restricted in where they can go?
Well, we have a situation here where you have the administration that's currently in power advocates that people could do basically whatever they want. And here's a good example. Those folks there, they're wearing their mask. And just a little look at the old school architecture here in town. That dates back to the latter part of the 19th century. Most of these buildings, these stone buildings like this stone church that you see here, this would be, let me get across the street here. This would be architecture that would probably be, I would say, ran the red line, that would be probably about 1880, 1882. So make it out of stone. It stays for a long period of time. But of course, you've got Joe Biden saying right now that if Trump still tests positive, that they are, here you go, I was off by a little bit, 1905 for that church.
Were you there for the opening?
Yes, I was there. You can see the pictures. But right now you have Biden saying that, hey, we should not have a debate if Trump still tests positive for COVID. But what they could do, and what there's a lot of speculation on, is that's pretty cool. A light down there on the ground. That's neat. Anyway, what they're speculating now is they could have them in two different locations. I mean, they did that for the last Kennedy-Nixon debate back in 1960. So if they could do it 60 years ago with the candidates in different cities and even the moderator in a different city, they should be able to pull it off this time. But it's going to be fascinating to see if there is another Trump-Biden debate. And of course, by the time you watch this, you will know what happened in the vice presidential debate, which is happening, of course, in Salt Lake City. And big discussions there because the Democrat, Kamala Harris, they wanted the plastic partition, the plexiglass partition, while the Republicans, Mike Pence, no, didn't want it. And they've spread out even further. So this will be an interesting event.
What's the feeling in Philly at the moment towards, I mean, you mentioned it's a Democratic city, although out in the burbs, they've got the leaning towards maybe the Donald. Do you think that is that an indication of what's happening throughout the US, generally the major cities, they're in favour of generally the Democrats, and then as you get out in the suburbs or out into the country or into the farmland, do you think they sort of swing towards the Republicans?
Well, I think we're seeing more and more in the hinterlands, or what is affectionately known here in Pennsylvania as Pennsyltucky, that is starting to go for Biden. I just wanted to mention before you elaborate further on that, this is kind of interesting. Of course, we've talked before about Breonna Taylor. Here's a little street memorial to Breonna Taylor. And if you do come to Philadelphia, not so much here on Baltimore Avenue, but they have some of the most amazing murals. This is really a city of murals that they have, and it is really remarkable. No, Pennsylvania, the central portion of the state, will still probably vote for Trump. Of course, this was one of the three key states that put Trump in the White House. It was just a couple of thousand votes that did it for him. It was the three states being Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So what we've got going on here is just a swing of literally fewer people than you would fit in the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Grounds, can decide the election as it did back in 2016. It certainly can here in Pennsylvania. And that's why there is such an effort by the Democrats, by the Biden campaign, to get out the vote here in Philadelphia. Because if they have a strong voter turnout here in Philadelphia, and to a lesser extent across the state in Western Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, that will overwhelm the rural vote. So they're hoping for at least maybe a 40% Democrat vote in rural Pennsylvania, and that will overwhelm the strong urban vote will overwhelm the vote from the rural part of the state. You can see a little bit in the distance there, if you look, some of the skyscrapers of Center City. Now, if you ever come to Philadelphia, do not call it downtown. Philadelphia does not have a downtown. It's got Center City.
Kirk Clyatt, walking the streets of Philadelphia. What I should have had was some Rocky Balboa music, but I can't find any Rocky music for you, so we'll just have to imagine it. Kirk, thank you very much. See you in Vegas next week.
I'll be there. Hopefully, if the plane makes it, I'll be there, and I'll look forward to it always. But if you get a chance, if the world ever returns to a semi-normal condition, come see Philadelphia. It really is a great American city, but probably not a good idea to visit next year or two, because it's going to take that long for us to get our act together here in the U.S.